Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Stewart, and the disease that I chose for my poster is called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as ALS, and even more commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. ALS is a fatal neurodegenerative disease that affects nerve cells in the spinal cord in the brain, and it is a very progressive disease. 90% of these cases, 90% of the ALS cases, there is no family history or presence of any genetic mutations. In the other 5 to 10% of these cases, they are considered familial ALS, and these cases, there is a 50% chance that each offspring will inherit the gene mutation. Typically, people that are diagnosed with ALS are between 55 and 65 years old. However, that does not mean that nobody gets it in other age ranges. People older than 65 can have ALS, and people as young as in their 20s can also have ALS. The incidence rates, 2 out of 100,000 people are diagnosed each year. So the prevalence for that would be 4 out of 100,000 are actually living with ALS. Life expectancy for those individuals with ALS is 2 to 5 years. That is the typical life expectancy. And there is absolutely no survival rate. So nobody has ever survived ALS. So the way ALS works are motor neurons in the spinal cord and brain. They degenerate and die. So they basically stop sending messages to the muscles, and the brain will eventually lose the ability to initiate and control voluntary movements. And I read an article about ALS that kind of explains the Greek language behind it. Amyotrophic comes from the Greek language. A means no, myo refers to muscle, trophic means nourishment. So amyotrophic means no muscle nourishment. And so when the muscle has no nourishment, it atrophies or wastes away. And then lateral, of course, identifies the areas in a person's spinal cord where portions of the nerve cells that signal and control the muscles are located. And as this area degenerates, it leads to scarring or hardening, which would be sclerosis, in the region. So when the motor neurons die, the ability of the brain to initiate and control muscle movement is lost. And so when voluntary muscle action is progressively affected like that, people will end up losing the ability to speak, to eat, to move, and also to breathe. So the first signs of ALS are muscle twitches, muscle cramps, stiff muscles, muscle weakness, slurred speech, and difficulty chewing and swallowing. And these symptoms can often be mistaken for MS or Parkinson's disease. So what I found very interesting is that there is no actual test to diagnose ALS. And when someone starts having these symptoms, basically their doctor starts running all kinds of different tests, lab tests and scans to eliminate other diseases. And they kind of narrow it down to, you have ALS. So these tests include, lab tests where they, take blood and urine. They do muscle or nerve biopsies. They may do a spinal tap. They'll do x-rays they'll do magnetic imaging or an MRI. They may do an EMG, and so, yeah, basically they just eliminate a whole bunch of things, and once those other diseases, or autoimmune disorders are off the plate, then they narrow it down to these individuals, being diagnosed with ALS. So, I also found it interesting that a French neurologist was the first person to discover ALS in 1869. So, ALS can affect anyone, anywhere, and at any time. So, there's the thing with ALS is that nobody has the answers, which we will talk more about. But yeah, I mean, no one knows anything, basically, even after all these years of research. So, treatment-wise, as there is no cure for ALS, there are different measures taken to help relieve the symptoms, or manage the symptoms, rather. So, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, respiratory and nutritional therapies, may be helpful in managing the symptoms. Individuals also may use heat or whirlpool therapy to relieve, the muscle cramping. And in the beginning stages, exercise in moderation may help maintain muscle strength and function. There is no, proven treatment for ALS. However, there is an FDA-approved medication called Riluzole. I believe that's how you pronounce it. And so what scientists and doctors have figured out is that glutamate is a neurotransmitter that's required for nerve cells to communicate with each other. But when there's too much glutamate, it ends up taking over and killing the nerve cells. So when one nerve cell dies from this excess activation, it releases glutamate into its surrounding, which can contribute to the death of all the neighboring nerve cells in a continuous loop. So Riluzole is expected to keep the glutamate under control a little bit. And it really, the Riluzole, they're saying that it can extend somebody's life, but when I looked up the statistics, it was only by 6 months to a year. So, not great statistics there. So, this disease has personally had an impact on me, because I worked for hospice for 6 years, and so I ended up having 2 patients that had ALS, and it was one of the saddest and most disturbing diseases I think that I have witnessed somebody dying from. Because, basically their whole body just starts shutting down, and the only part of the body that doesn't stop is the mind. So even till their very last breath, their mind is still good, and they still know what is going on. And usually individuals with ALS die of suffocation. And so anyway, it's a very, very, very sad disease. I will never forget those 2 patients that passed away from ALS. It was pitiful. Lou Gehrig, who was a baseball player, and Stephen Hawking have brought global awareness of ALS. They were both famous people. Lou Gehrig, he was a baseball player, and if it wasn't for him, for Lou Gehrig and Stephen Hawking, I don't know if there would be as much awareness of ALS. But ALS, or Lou Gehrig, I'm sorry. Lou Gehrig was diagnosed. He played for the Yankees. He played baseball for the Yankees, and he ended up being diagnosed with ALS on his 36th birthday. Prior to his diagnosis, Lou Gehrig noticed several of the disease's symptoms while he was playing on the field. So those symptoms included, loss of strength. He was slipping and falling and losing coordination. And shortly after his diagnosis, Lou Gehrig chose to retire from baseball, and unfortunately he passed away only a year and a half after he was diagnosed. And then Stephen Hawking, he was a very interesting ALS case because he ended up living for 55 years with ALS. As far as I'm aware, nobody else has ever lived that long. And it still kind of like blows scientists' minds because they don't know, because there's so little known about ALS. They don't know how he was able to live that long. But he was first diagnosed when he was 21 years old, and he survived for 55 years, like I said. Doctors and scientists think that he probably had a very rare type of ALS that was not as progressive as other types of ALS. It's just hard to say, but he also received phenomenal care, and his wife started out taking care of him, but then he also ended up having a medical team that took care of him 24/7, and it's supposedly proven that the better care an individual has with or receives that has been diagnosed with ALS, then the longer they will end up living. So he had a whole medical team that cared for him until the very end. But because of those two people, ALS, has brought, there's global awareness due to that. As far as a societal response, there's ongoing research. There's been ongoing research for years and years and years, but I'm hoping that one day someone will figure it out. And then, of course, pharmaceutical companies are trying out different, they're searching for medications that may, prolong for a longer time span, or, something they can do to cure ALS, but it's not looking very hopeful at this point. Excuse me. So, in conclusion, ALS affects a relatively small group of people. It is a neurodegenerative disease, and it is also a very fatal disease, and research is ongoing.